Live from London, this is BBC News. Opposition leaders call for Rishi Sunak to take tougher action in response to claims that Conservative insiders made bets on the timing of the general election.
If anyone is found to have broken the rules, they should not only face the full consequences of the law, well, I will ensure that they are booted out of the Conservative Party too.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, criticises the Prime Minister and calls for the candidates to be suspended.
The instinct of these Tories, when the general election is called, is not how do we make this work for the country, but how do I make some money? And that tells you a broader picture about politics. Of course he should suspend these candidates.
I've been spending the day in Greenock finding out what Scottish voters want from this general election campaign.
Our other headlines today: the Chief Constable of Northamptonshire Police is dismissed for lying about his military service. More than 1,000 people are feared dead during the annual Hajj pilgrimage as a heatwave grips Saudi Arabia. And the England football manager Gareth Southgate admits his team are feeling a little bit short of expectations after drawing 1-1 against Denmark at Euro 2024. Hello to you, welcome to BBC News. I'm Ben Thompson. We are 2 weeks away from knowing the result of the general election. The political parties continue their rallies across the country. Rishi Sunak has been campaigning in Wales today, but his efforts to promote the Conservatives' Welsh manifesto were overshadowed by questions about Tory insiders allegedly gambling on the date of the election. The Prime Minister insisted multiple independent investigations were underway and that any Tories found to have broken betting rules will be booted out of the party. Take a listen.
There are multiple investigations that are currently happening. It's right that those investigations are allowed to proceed. They are independent. They are necessarily confidential, as you will appreciate. There's also a criminal investigation, and these are potentially criminal matters, and the police are conducting those. You'll be aware of that. And because of that, I hope you can appreciate there's not much more I can add. What I can tell you is, as I said, if anyone is found to have broken the rules, they should not only face the full consequences of the law, well, I will ensure that they are booted out of the Conservative Party too.
Well, Labour has accused Rishi Sunak of a total lack of leadership for not suspending the candidates over those allegations. Here's Sir Keir Starmer speaking a little earlier.
The Prime Minister is showing a total lack of leadership on this. Let's look at what actually happened. In relation to a general election, the instinct of these Tories, when the general election is called, is not how do we make this work for the country, but how do I make some money? And that tells you a broader picture about politics. Of course he should suspend these candidates. If they were my candidates, they'd be gone by now, out of the door. He needs to take tough action. I think he's not even saying today whether there's more involved. So he needs a full account. It's a total lack of leadership.
Well, the Liberal Democrat leader, that's Sir Ed Davey, also urged the Prime Minister to take tougher action on those accused of breaking the rules.
I think if people know the outcome of something and they bet on it, I think that's immoral, and I don't think that looks right. And too often in this Parliament, we've seen the Conservative Party, certainly members of the Conservative Party, looking like they're in it for themselves, not for public service and what's in the best interest of the country. So I hope he'll take some tougher action.
Let's take you live to Westminster, and our political correspondent Harry Farley is there. And Harry really has dominated the agenda today, despite what all the parties want to talk about. Everyone wants to know about who knew what about the dates of the election.
Yes, that's right, Ben. The questions around this continue to swirl and to dominate campaigning today. Just to remind you, if you're coming to this late or you've forgotten the details, we know 4 people are being looked into over alleged bets placed on the timing of an election before it was called. 2 of them are Conservative candidates, Laura Saunders and Craig Williams. Mr Williams has apologised. He said he made an error of judgment, and Ms Saunders said that she will cooperate fully with the inquiry by the Gambling Commission. There's also the Conservative Director of Campaigning. He has stepped back from that role, and a police officer serving in Rishi Sunak's close protection team. But as you say, questions around this continue to swirl. well. Mr. Sunak has said that there is a limit to what he can say because there is an investigation ongoing. But he was asked directly today whether he knew of anyone else who was being looked into over alleged bets that had been placed. He did not answer that question directly, but he did say, as you heard just then, that if anyone has been found to have broken the rules, then they should face the full force of the law, and he would ensure that they're kicked out of the Conservative Party. But I think it's fair to say, Ben, it's less than 2 weeks now, remember, until polling day, and these are questions that the Conservative Party could really do without at this stage of the campaign.
And Harry, while you're with us, let's talk about fundraising and donations to all the political parties. We've got a number that suggests that Labour donations 15 times the level of the Conservatives. And this relates to the second week of the election campaign, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right, Ben. So this is donations between the 6th and 12th of June. So every week during an election campaign, the parties must report to the Electoral Commission any donations they receive above a certain figure, around £11,000. And so for that second week of the campaign, 6th to the 12th of June, Labour received more than £4.3 million, the largest single donation coming from Lord Sainsbury, the former party donor under Tony Blair. He switched and gave money to the Liberal Democrats when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of Labour and has recently started donating back to Labour again. So a real boost for Keir Starmer's, I suppose, wooing of different business leaders, obviously the former supermarket chair there. The Conservatives, as you say, they only raised £292,000 during that second week, behind the Liberal Democrats, who raised £335,000, and behind even Reform UK, who raised nearly £250,000, most of which, though, through a company owned by their chairman, Richard Tice. So I think that tells you, that gulf, I suppose, in particular, between Labour and the Conservatives, tells you a little bit about the optimism, the sense of enthusiasm from people who typically give to those different parties. And Labour particularly will be very pleased with that donation, that £2.5 million donation from Lord Sainsbury's in particular.
Harry, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much, Harry Foley, there live in Westminster for us. Let's talk now to the Conservatives. We can speak to Damian Green, who's former First Secretary of State and Minister for the Cabinet Office. Damian Green, good to have you with us. I want to come on to that, the date of the election, that betting in just a second. But let's talk about that, the donations. Conservatives raising £292,500 in the second week. Labour on £4.3 million. What's gone wrong?
Well, I mean, I think mostly, as you say, it's that £2.5 million one donation from Lord Sainsbury, who has in the past given vast sums to Labour, as he did. He funded quite a lot of the Remain campaign, I seem to remember as well. So I think, it's Labour, traditional Labour supporters getting behind the Labour Party. That's not very surprising. I think in terms of I think when we get to the end of this campaign, you'll find that the spending is relatively even, that the Conservative Party has been very efficient at raising money over the past 18 months. So I think that the week-by-week figures during the election don't indicate that we're running out of money or anything like that, that we will have enough money to fight a full and vigorous campaign.
Sure, no, and you're quite right. I mean, this doesn't tell us how much money's in the coffers and how much money there is to spend. But I think it's just indicative, isn't it? Looking, you raise less than the Liberal Democrats in that week too, and it speaks to a certain view, perhaps, of what may happen come the 4th of July. People aligning their money and their support behind different causes, and it certainly seems in that second week that wasn't the Conservative cause.
Well, the truth is that if you're giving money at this stage, particularly huge sums like that sum from Lord Sainsbury, it's a bit strange because you can't spend that much money during the short campaign anyway. So I'm slightly puzzled by this. If he wants to support the Labour Party, then it might have been more use to them if he'd done it 6 months ago. So, as I say, I think in the end it's possible to over-fixate on week-by-week figures when you've only got 2 weeks to go before the general election.
So let's talk then as well about the other story that's dominating all of the headlines today. It's about who within the Conservative Party knew about the date of the election, and people were putting bets on it, by all accounts, about when that would be. The Prime Minister has said he will boot out anyone who is found guilty of breaking the rules. When will that happen?
Well, when the investigation is finished, I think it's a reasonable course of British justice, if you like, that you do the investigation, you find out what happened, you find out who did what, and at the end of that, you decide whether there needs to be punishment, and if so, what that punishment should be. You can't, I mean, there are some people who are arguing, let's have the punishment now, and then we'll do the investigation. That would clearly be the wrong way around. So I absolutely share what the Prime Minister said, that he's angry, and that if anyone has been proved to have done wrong, then they will be punished. And so let's get this investigation done as soon as possible. It's done by the Gambling Commission, which is obviously an independent body. But investigation first, verdict afterwards seems to me the sensible order of things.
Yeah, and I think most people would absolutely agree that there needs to be a fair investigation. The reason I ask about the timing, though, and as you said, it's independent, so it's out of your hands, but it could take it after the election. So potentially over the next couple of weeks, we may not know the outcome of that investigation when we do go to the polls.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. But if it's going to take that long, it's going to take that long. But I think just as a normal procedure of justice and law enforcement, you have to have a full investigation before you take any action, particularly if that action is going to be to punish someone.
The Labour leader said what's unfolded, or what's alleged to have unfolded, is symptomatic of a Tory party. He said the first instinct of the Tories was, how can I make money out of this? A lot of people looking at what's gone on, or what is reported to have gone on, may come to the same conclusion, and that's not a message you want to send to voters. How frustrating, how damaging is it for the Conservative campaign for allegations of that nature to be thrown at the Conservatives, saying all you want to do in this election is make some money?
It is frustrating. I think you've hit on exactly the right word. I am very, as well as angry, I'm very frustrated because this is a perfectly legitimate line of questioning for you to follow on one of today's big political stories. I would much prefer to come on and talk about Labour's tax plans, our tax plans, our plans on immigration, Labour's softness on immigration, all the big issues that will actually affect people in their daily lives. And instead, we're talking about this. So absolutely, I am very frustrated.
Damian Green, I'm grateful for you spending time with us. Thank you. Former First Secretary of State there and Minister for the Cabinet Office. Good to have you with us. Thank you. And he's off. Now, on the campaign trail today, the SNP have been promoting their plans for growth, as well as plans to cut VAT for businesses. On a visit to Glasgow, the party's deputy leader, Kate Forbes, said the SNP would demand whoever wins the election to commit to cutting the rate of VAT in an effort to boost business and grow the economy.
Scotland, under the SNP, has for 8 years been the top destination for foreign direct investment because investors see what we're doing and like it, and that's outside London and the South East, of course. We also have an agenda for growth when it comes to abolishing or cutting rates for over 100,000 businesses, proposing today a cut to VAT for hospitality businesses that have been challenged. So we believe that there's a record here that Scotland can be proud of. We want to go further.
So, as we said, there are just under 2 weeks now until polling day. And in the run-up to that day, we've been speaking to people right across the UK to find out what is important to them and what might win their vote next month. We've been in constituencies all over the country, today focusing on the big issues for voters in Scotland. Well, our BBC Scotland political correspondent is David Wallace-Lockhart. He's in Greenock in Scotland for us. And David, you were talking to us earlier. You were introducing us to some voters, some first-time voters, some businesses there. What's the sense that you've had throughout the day about what people there in Scotland, in Greenock, want Westminster to deliver for them?
Well, Ben, welcome to summer on the west coast of Scotland. It's got so cold I've had to now put my coat on, but we've had nothing but a warm welcome from the people of Greenock today. A bit of context for this seat: it's Inverclyde and Renfrewshire West. That'll be the name of it at the next election. Former industrial area, shipbuilding was big here. Are areas of deprivation in this constituency these days, the sort of area that traditionally would have been a reliable Labour seat at every election, but since 2015 it's the SNP who've been representing this area, and that's sort of the key fight at the upcoming general election. In terms of issues, we've spent the day here. We've been at a community kitchen that was feeding people in Greenock who were coming along for a free lunch. We've been at the local football stadium talking to young people who are learning skills to hopefully help them in the job market. And there were a couple of issues that really did keep coming up. The cost of living, simply an issue that voters here want to see addressed. Those concerns about what's going into people's bank accounts each month, just not sufficient for what's coming out at the moment. And another big issue, young people who really don't see a huge amount of job opportunities here, who are almost becoming somewhat resigned to that idea of having to move away to other parts of Scotland or perhaps even further afield if they want job opportunities going forward. And I would say another perhaps slight topic that's been raising its head time and time again is perhaps a sense of voter apathy, a sense of constituents not being entirely confident that whatever happens at the election, those issues I've just been talking about are fundamentally going to change, or at least are going to change in the short term. But that's what the candidates here will be trying to convince voters, not just in this seat, but in seats across Scotland, that they can ultimately make the changes to basically improve people's lives in seats like this, Inverclyde and Renfrewshire West.
I mean, David, you're quite right. We're looking at a beautiful drone shot that's just above your head somewhere there. It looks gorgeous, but it doesn't look like summer by any stretch of the imagination. Talk to me about, as well, these, what those issues there tell us about the wider Scottish political landscape. Is there a sense in what those voters are telling you about, how this election could be won or lost by each party up there?
Yeah, I think the issues we're hearing about, Ben, in this very picturesque, beautiful constituency are similar to those being talked about in other areas of Scotland. The Scottish political landscape is an interesting one. There are lots of SNP v Labour seats, but in other parts of the country, it's where the SNP are always either the incumbent or the main challenger, really. In Scotland, it's the Conservatives they're taking on. In some patches, it's the Liberal Democrats. And yes, those issues of cost of living, of good job opportunities will be big across the country, but there are other patches with more localised areas. If you go to the Highlands, you'll perhaps hear about rural issues, about a shortage of people to take on job vacancies. Some point the finger of blame at Brexit. Some say not enough has been done to ensure that Scotland's rural communities are supported. If you go to areas like the northeast of Scotland, the oil and gas industry and the uncertain future it faces as the Scottish Government and the UK Government try to move the country towards more of a focus on renewables, you'll hear that as a concern that voters bring up, and you'll hear that as an issue that the parties are trying to convince constituents that they've ultimately got the best plans on. But across Scotland, and I think a very similar picture across the whole of the UK, there are concerns about the cost of living. There are concerns about how the NHS is working. There are concerns about job opportunities for young people. An interesting final nugget to talk about in this election in Scotland is independence. It is an issue. It is definitely a factor. All the parties contesting the election up here have strong positions on it, but perhaps it's not just at the front of the campaign as much as it has been in previous general elections in Scotland. That may well change in the 2 weeks we've got running up to campaign day, running up to voting day itself, but I do feel that issue of independence, it's there, it's always a factor in Scottish politics at the moment, but it's perhaps not quite as front in the campaign as it has been in 2019 and 2017.
David, really good to get your assessment of a really busy day for you. Thank you for talking us through all that and introducing us to so many people right across that region. Thank you, David Wallace Lockhart there for us in Greenock. You can see a list of all the candidates who are running in that constituency at the general election. They are right there on the screen. There's a list of all the candidates standing in all the constituencies, particularly those around you. Check them out on the BBC News website. And we should remind you too, Nick Robinson continues his series of interviews tonight with the party leaders. Tonight he'll be joined by the Reform UK party leader Nigel Farage. That's on Panorama at 7 o'clock BBC One and on the BBC iPlayer at the same time. Or, of course, you can watch the interview again right here on BBC News at 8:30. Now let's turn to some of our other main stories today. And the Chief Constable of Northamptonshire Police, that's Nick Adley, has been found guilty of gross misconduct amid claims he exaggerated his rank and length of service and then lied about his naval achievements. Midlands correspondent Navtesh Johal explains more.
This is frankly an extraordinary case with very serious implications, and not just for Nick Adley, the man at the heart of it all. If we go back to the beginning, this was all sparked by a complaint from a member of the public who turned out to be Nick Adley's ex-wife, who took issue with media reports about his naval record. And that complaint has led eventually to this, a gross misconduct hearing, which has been poring over claims made by Nick Adley about his career. And they include him implying that he had served in the Falklands War, even though he was just 15 at the time of the conflict in 1982, that he worked as a military negotiator in Haiti in the 1980s, even though he had never visited the country, and that he wore medals that he had not earned. And on that, specifically, a South Atlantic medal, which was given to Falkland War veterans, which was described by one medal expert in the hearing as 110% a fake. Now, the panel found that all of the allegations had been proven. They dismissed him from his job as Chief Constable, and they highlighted what they felt was his arrogant temerity in terms of how he lied. They said that he had shown sustained and brazen dishonesty, and that his application for the job had contained lie upon lie. Despite being instructed to do so, Mr. Adley did not attend the conclusion of the hearing here today, but through his legal counsel, he released a statement which said that he apologised to the veterans and families that he'd caused any hurt or offence to, but he himself did not appear. He had appeared at previous days earlier in the hearing. And in terms of the impact of this, at the end of the hearing, the panel did note that this case is likely to have a serious and lasting harm on the reputation of the police.
Navto's Joe Hull speaking to me a little earlier. Now the time 21 minutes past 5, and families across the Middle East are waiting to hear whether their relatives are among more than 1,000 pilgrims who are reported to have been killed at the annual Hajj festival, killed by the stifling heat. While Saudi Arabia hasn't released official figures, more and more individual countries are now confirming the deaths of their citizens in Mecca. That includes Egypt. The Egyptian government has pledged to investigate local brokers who sent thousands to the holy city of Mecca without the required paperwork. In the last hour, a senior Saudi official has defended the kingdom's management of the event, telling the news agency AFP that the state did not fail, but that there was a misjudgment on the part of people who didn't appreciate the risks. The BBC's Sally Nabil visited the northern province of Egypt and met one bereaved family of one of the victims.
A family in mourning over the loss of their mother. 70-year-old Afendiya went to the Muslim holy city of Mecca for Hajj, a lifelong dream to fulfill her religious duty, a duty that led to her death. She was among hundreds of Egyptian pilgrims who lost their lives while performing rituals in the unforgiving Saudi heat. Her children believe she died of exhaustion.
I screamed and couldn't believe it. She phoned my brother and told him she felt her soul is leaving her body. I wish I was with her.
Pilgrims who didn't want to pay fees or tackle the bureaucracy made use of a visitor's visa, but this route has turned out to be very costly. Afendiya was one of these unregistered pilgrims. Selling her jewellery to pay for the trip, she used the local broker. He promised her a flawless service, but reality was different.
When I called her, she was pouring water over her head because of the heat. She could barely open her eyes. She told me the bus dropped her 12 kilometers away from Mount Arafat, and she had to walk all this way on foot.
The broker took advantage of her passion to go and made promises. When I called, her face was as red as a tomato. They made a tent out of bed sheets. They had no accommodation. Official pilgrims have air-conditioned tents and meals. My mum's death broke me.
Many Egyptian pilgrims come from poor villages like this one, mostly old people who put their lifetime savings to make this spiritual journey. For them, it is a dream to go to Mecca. They didn't know that they will never come back. Families here have been telling me they have no idea who will be held accountable for this tragedy. The Egyptian authorities now say they are going to investigate the tour companies that offer unofficial Hajj trips. Most of the dead are said to have been unofficial pilgrims. The Saudi authorities have initially banned them from joining Hajj, but they eventually changed their mind. It appears no preparations have been in place to handle this overflow of people. Fears are growing that the death toll will rise even further, and more Egyptian families might be paying farewell to their loved ones. Sally Nabil, BBC News, Menofia, Northern Egypt.
Around 1,500 Tata Steel workers will begin an indefinite strike next month over the company's plans to cut thousands of jobs. The move is the first time in more than 40 years that steel workers in the UK have taken strike action. Around 2,800 Tata Steel workers are set to lose their jobs when the company closes both blast furnaces in Port Talbot by the end of September. The strike will begin on the 8th of July at Port Talbot's and Tata Llanwern site in Newport. I'll have the headlines for you very shortly, but let's check in on the weather. Sarah Keith Lucas has the details.
Hello. Friday's weather brought us an east-west split across the UK. We had quite a lot of cloud for many western areas, some patchy outbreaks of rain. This was the picture in Argyll and Bute a little bit earlier on, but a really different picture for many central and eastern areas. Some spells of blue sky and warm sunshine, as you can see from the scene in Whitby a little earlier on. Now, through the weekend, a bit more of this. We have still got some warm sunshine to come. There will be a little bit of rain in the forecast at times. I think we won't all see it, but a slightly mixed picture over the next couple of days. Through the course of this evening and tonight, we've got this cloud and patchy rain moving from west to east. So a bit of a damp start to Saturday morning across central and eastern parts of England in particular. Clearer skies, though, reappearing from the west. So it's here that temperatures will just about dip into single figures. But a mild night in the east, 13 or 14 degrees to kick off your weekend. But we do start with that low cloud and drizzly light rain in the east. It should tend to break up and brighten up through the day. And actually for much of the UK, then we're looking at spells of sunshine. So a brighter day for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, the southwest of England too, but a bit more cloud just creeping into the far northwest by the end of the afternoon. So temperatures in Stornoway, for instance, just 15 degrees, but for the bulk of the UK, 18 to 22. So a touch cooler and fresher than it was on Friday. But if you suffer from hay fever, you might want to look away now. Very high levels of pollen, really almost across the map, just low or moderate across the north of Scotland. So as we move through into the second half of the weekend, now we've still got those high pollen levels. We've also got high pressure that's squeezing away most of those weather fronts. The remnants of a frontal system still bringing a bit more clouds past northern England, Wales, down towards the southwest on Sunday, but that should break up through the day. Either side of that, some longer spells of sunshine, and I think it'll feel a bit warmer than Saturday and a bit more humid, especially towards the southeast with a change in wind direction. 24, 25 degrees for London, the southeast as well, but we're looking at more widely temperatures in the high teens or low 20s. By the time we get to Monday, again, a bit more cloud drifting into the northwest of the UK. So some areas of cloud around, not wall-to-wall sunshine, but some spells of warm June sunshine and temperatures up to about 27, possibly 28 degrees. So some warm weather on the cards over the next couple of days. It looks like things turn a little bit more unsettled and a touch cooler initially in the northwest and then spreading a bit further east through the second half of this coming week. Bye-bye.